Hello and welcome from the Institute of Korean Study at Freie University Berlin for today's lectures. My name is Dr. Kang Ho-jae. I am a research professor at the Institute of Korean Studies. My major and research topic and teaching topic is North Korea, especially history of science, technology, and policy in North Korea. It's my pleasure to be hosting this event. Today's lecture is the second in a series of special lectures on North Korea in summer semester of 2022, organized and hosted within the framework of the Korean Europe Center, a joint project by our institute and the KDI School of Public Policy and Management in Sejong City. With the title of How to Understand North Korea, we will focus on the method of gathering the direct information to understand North Korean thought. And the invited lecturer will show you what they have understood with the direct information and know how to analyze the information. We would like to improve it as a kind of a research project, named as the GATE project. The topic of today's lecture is North Korean refugee or defector. The exact title is North Korean defectors account as a source of information, issues, and controversies. The key question of today's lecture is, what are the benefits and risks of treating North Korean defectors account as a resource of research data? This lecture will offer some guideline on how to approach the defectors account and how to avoid people in using their story for scientific purpose. Now, I want to introduce you to today's lecturer, Dr. Hyuk Jung. In 2005, he started his career as NGO activities in the field of peace and the unification movement. In 2020, he earned his doctorate degree in political science at Freie University Berlin, where he was awarded summa cum laude. Currently, he is a Deputy Director of Communication Divisions at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Korea. His area of research interest include human rights and peace, civil society, transitional justice. Dr. Jung, it's your time.
Okay, thank you for coming today. Okay, let's get started. I will share my screen. Today's topic is about North Korean people. Especially those North Koreans who, for whatever reasons, left their country. And especially this presentation will focus on those who have already offered their story, or those who might be willing to tell you their story when you ask them to do so, especially those who left North Korea, their homeland, and especially those who already offered their story, either at the international fora or in front of the press. I hope this lecture or this presentation help you to prepare for your future research when you use this interviewer fieldwork method for your research. I was asked to this question when I was first offered this presentation by the Institute of Korean Studies. Okay, let me read. Are the testimonies of North Korean defectors suitable data for research to understand North Korea? I think this is a very important question from a methodological standpoint. However, what I'm trying to explain today is it's not very much about methods. In terms of methods in studying North Korea, you can just consult any relevant books or articles, in general, about methods, and you can just apply to your own project. That's enough, I think. And if you need something that is more focused on North Korean studies, you can start with this article. This is written by Jae Song, Professor Song at the University of Melbourne. You can find all the references I will cite in this lecture at the end of this PowerPoint file. So I will share all this file. Don't worry about this. Instead of talking about method, today I'd like you to think about much deeper questions. Who are they? Who are the North Korean defectors? What exactly are the North Korean defectors? How can you call them? Some people call them defectors, but others tend to, or sometimes intentionally, call them refugees, escapees, settlers, or even free North Koreans. So in the first part in this presentation, I will talk about the naming problem. The second is about how question. So my question is, how did these Koreans become what they are now today? In other words, what was a political, social, and discursive environment that have contributed to, for example, enabling them to courageously testify against their own, home country? The second part is about the social construction of North Korean defectors. If time permits, I will talk about the literature on North Korean defectors using interviews. Background: in the mid-90s, as you know very well, the Great Famine in North Korea broke out, and it led a massive outflow of North Koreans to China. It's important. They left North Korea and entered into China, not South Korea. Okay. As this opportunity, this new phenomena allows researchers to collect new data. So it's a first-hand experiences, so the first-hand stories from genuine North Koreans. And some researchers, or I would say researchers and NGOs and NGO activists and journalists, they did field work in China and conducting interviews and surveys. One of the pioneers is that it was good friends, the 좋은 법들. It's a Buddhist faith-based organization. Now it's not operational anymore, but it's called 정토회. The head of 정토회 is 법륜 스님, the monk 법륜 is a peace activist. I think it was 1995, 1996. Some activists from 좋은 법들 and the good friends, they flew to China. You know what happened in 1992? South Korea and China made diplomatic relations, So they get a visa and they went to China, Northeast China, and they had opportunity to get, actually meeting North Koreans hiding in these areas. Good friends, they conducted over 1,000 survey, face-to-face survey. It's not actually interview, but yeah, it's a kind of survey, and they released their own report. And it was very, very novel at the time. It contains the humanitarian situations inside North Korea. So when they had a press conference, when they released their reports, so many foreign government agencies and press journalists, they came to hear about their findings. This all happened after the famine in North Korea, and also the research papers and media reports on, especially on human rights situations, significantly increased during this era. But the problem is, since the mid-90s, North Korean defectors' testimonies have been repeatedly or systematically used as a reference to analyze not only everyday life, but also every aspect of North Korea's state behavior. I also think it is problematic that defectors, or I would say some defectors, became the authentic experts occupying a position of commanding knowledge in the true nature of the regime. Let me proceed to explain what this means. I would argue that using defectors' account for research purpose is risky. If I cite Song and Danny, there are a lot of problems when using defectors' account for as a source of information. First one is it's unverifiable. So what they say, you cannot actually find out whether it's true or false because it's impossible to conduct field work. And second problem is there's a sampling issue. So, for example, in this article, the authors argue that over 70% of North Korean defectors who settled in South Korea were from two provinces that share a border with China, that is 함경북도, North Hamgyong, and Yanggangdo, Ryanggang. These two provinces are one of the most poorest area in North Korea, so it cannot represent the other area in the north, and it only comprise the about 12% of whole population. And they also pointed out the unequal or asymmetrical power relations and bias between researchers and defectors, because over 70 to 80% of defectors are women, relatively less educated. Everything is new to them. So it takes time. They say it takes time to have some trust and relationship to get a true or, genuine testimony from these defectors. And I totally agree with this Song and Danny's argument. But I even go further to argue that using North Korean defectors' story as a research data without taking into account the constructiveness of North Korean defector will be very likely fail. Because I think that the defector's identity should be understood within a broader historical, social, and discursive context. So, first, the naming problem. There are multiple names that indicate North Korean who left the country. First one was 월남자. From 1945. What happened in 1945 is Korea was liberated from Japanese imperialist occupation, and until 1953, the Korean War was ended. Technically not ended, but the ceasefire agreement was signed. So during this time, hundreds of thousands of people cross over to the south. They are called 월남. The wol means crossover. From 1960 to late 1980s, we call them 귀순자. 귀 means you're coming back. You actually belong here, but you temporarily went away and then you come back here. I'm not satisfied with this repatriated people, the translation, but it's not that bad. So 귀순자, we call them 귀순자 or 귀순용사. 용사 means warrior or soldier. So it reflects the very militaristic sentiment during this period. Okay, and then 1990s, finally, 탈북자. We call them 탈북자. People who broke away or ran away from the north. Okay. 타 means you separate from something. 북 is the north. So 탈북자 is it translated as North Korean defector in English, but not a good translation either, I think. Let me explain later. In 2000, 세터민, this term is coined by the then Kim Dae-jung government. Under the Kim Dae-jung government, the Ministry of Unification, they suggest, let's call them 세터민. 세터민, there's no north, there's no coming back or separate something, just new settlers, okay? But the defector activists, the defector organization, they did not like this and they opposed to this new term. So now settlement, nobody uses settlement anymore, and the official term is now 북한 이탈 주민. It's very, very long. 북한 is North Korea, 이탈 is separate away, and then 주민 is resident. So it's a resident who broke away from North Korea. So there are so many names, and this is the history of the name. Today, officially, they are called 북한 이탈 주민. However, 탈북자 is more commonly used by lay people. It's easier to pronounce. 탈북자 actually sounds more intuitive. 북한이탈주민 is I think, very artificial, So only legal or official paper, they call them 북한이탈주민. It's too long. 탈북자 actually means anyone who left the north without government permission, regardless where they are located. This is problematic. But 북한이탈주민 is different. This is maybe Article 3 of the North Korean Refugee Protection and Settlement Support Act. Let me read. This act shall apply to residents escaping from North Korea who have expressed an intention to be protected by the Republic of Korea and then can become a 북한이탈주민. So, you can be 탈북자 in China or elsewhere, and then you have to show or express your intention to be 북한이탈주민. Okay? Makes sense? Unfortunately, sometimes both terms, 탈북자 and 북한이탈주민, are translated in English as defector, the term that has a strong political connotation. But this is my opinion. But for most South Koreans, 탈북자 isn't felt that way. So I think there's some lost in translation. There's yet another translation error. So 북한이탈주민 as North Korean refugees. This is even more problematic. Even the title law translated 북한이탈주민 as North Korean refugees. I mean, this is very messy. All the names, it's not properly defined and not properly used. So this is my definition. Let me clarify these terms. First, defectors. As I said, it has political meaning and it's now internationally used term. Okay, it's supported by especially by defector activists. 북한이탈주민, resident breaking away from the north. It's an official and legal term. These people are eligible to be protected by the South Korean government. Refugees, it had been used by some activists who tried to invoke international law, especially for those who they think yet to arrive in the South safely. So these activists think that the international community, including, South Korea, Japan, the US, and China, should recognize the people in China, the North Korean people in China, should be recognized as refugees, which means that they should be eligible to seek asylum at the embassies in China. Okay, but of course, if it did not succeed, because agreement between China and North Korea. So when these 탈북자 defectors or the escapees who were living in China, when they caught, they almost automatically deported to China, to North Korea. And many activists and many NGOs tried to prevent them to be deported, but it did not succeed. I will talk about this a bit more the later part. Okay, migrants. This is a neutral and academic term, and is mostly used by anthropologists. They treat North Koreans moving from the north to China or back and forth, and they focus on their autonomy, their agency. So they treat them as kind of diaspora, North Korean diaspora. And the South Korean leftist organizations and activists, in the past, they like to use this term because they think that, no, they are not refugees. It is inappropriate to recognize them as refugees. It's a not good strategy to recognize North Korean in China as refugees, because it will, it will make things worse, because that signals people inside North Korea to get out of that country and make the situation even worse. And then they emphasize that the people in China, their motivations are mostly economic, not political. But there was a debate between the left and right, especially during the early 2000s, about how can we define these people, refugees or migrants. So now the debate is actually over because the number of people leaving North Korea and hiding somewhere in China is very, very low. Because even COVID situation made things more difficult for North Koreans to leave their country. But even before the COVID situation, especially after Kim Jong-un took the position of the leader, it became really, really difficult for ordinary people in North Korea to leave the country. So above all, the terms I think cannot fully capture the complexity of the phenomena. Maybe I will recommend. It's better to recommend all these the history and the result of the process of the debate. You can read Kim Song-kyung's article. The reference list will be at the end of this presentation. Okay, to conclude this part, the political and ideological confrontation at the state and international level is being and having been reflected in this naming issue. That is the identity of North Korean defectors. So what they want is actually has been a site of debate, a site of struggle among left and right, among different government, between different administration. So what I'm trying to say here is that when we study or when we have interviews with North Korean defectors, they are not free of politics. They're intended or not. So I suggest we need to trace the historical context, or I say social construction of the North Korean defectors. This is my second part. As you can see here, this is the number of North Korean arrival to the south. Okay, I just will focus on from early 1990s to 2000. This period is very crucial. You can see here in 1993, only 8% entered South. From what I know, these people are entered South via Russia. There were logging overseas workers from North Korea in Siberia, and they seek asylum. Maybe this is not correct, but anyway, the important thing is only 8. Okay, and it jumped up to 52, 86, and now it's over 100. Okay, so here the famine happened, and then it significantly increased from 2002. Okay, yearly, every year, over 1,000, even 2,000 people successfully entered to the south. So what happened here? What happened here? Something happened. Okay, from mid 1990s to early 2000, the people who left North Korea, they have no intention to get into the South Korea because they have no idea what will happen when they go to South Korea, except for very, very bad propagandas, made by the North Korean regime. So they only wanted to just temporarily stay in China for mostly economic reasons. They wanted to support for their family or just stay in China, seek some temporary relief. This was huge. There is no exact data how many people from North Korea wandering around China, Northeast China. There's no exact data, but some activists argue during those times it's almost 20,000 or 30,000, and some people say even more are just wandering around China. Because of these visually shocking pictures and media reports, during this period, the famine was defined as humanitarian crisis. it was tragedy. Even if it is man-made tragedy, created a very sympathetic response, especially from South Korea. In 1995, Korea economy was relatively well off, before IMF crisis was 1997, and South Korea, the government changed from conservative party to liberal party. People felt a little bit more hospitable toward North Korea. People finally get rid of a red complex. So this is kind of romantic era. So during this period, a group of NGOs, a big group of NGOs, they initiated very, very large scale of campaign. The campaign called Help Our Brethren. 간동포돕기운동. That was the largest campaign since March 1st movement in 1990. If you're old enough to remember during that time, if you're Korean, you will remember that the fund raised by these NGOs was huge. It was reported for over 2 years in 한겨레 newspaper, 북한농부 돕기 campaign. So during this period, the main sentiment was humanitarianism, and these NGOs tried to provide emergency relief for these our poor compatriots. Okay, and so they even went they were allowed to enter North Korea because in year 2000, there was a summit between North and South Korea, and both agreed in exchange of no, it's not actually in exchange, but the South Korean government, they offered the very large scale of rice to North Korea, and it was channeled through various NGOs. So this happened from mid-1990s to early 2000. But there were some activists who had very different ideas, very different beliefs based on what they saw, what they experienced in China, and they began to take a very different approach. These are later called North Korean human rights organizations, and their argument is that aiding North Korea unconditionally is not the solution. It's actually the problem. If you just pour rice to that regime who funneled, all the money, all the food aid into other, source. It's pouring water into bottomless pit, and even more, you're essentially, kind of propping up the illegitimate regime. So these activists, these NGOs, they sometimes and more, they accompanying with international NGOs like Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International sometimes, and especially the US NGOs, and some European NGOs, Japanese NGOs. They employ various strategies to raise awareness of human rights violations inside and outside of North Korea. They use very very novel strategies, tactics like embassy storming, rescue activities, underground railroad. They developed this new route from North Korea to the South, East Asia, and again to the South Korea. And they also assisted defectors to provide testimonies at the international and other official sites. And it succeeded very well. This is embassy storming. I have interviewed with the activist that has prepared for this Spanish embassy storming. This is in German. I can't remember. But anyway, this is called planned defection. Korean, we call it 기획, which means it's not spontaneous. It's orchestrated by activists. So, of course, these are all refugees. Defectors, North Korean defectors, and it would be very curious who took these pictures. Maybe somebody worried what will happen beforehand, right? So yeah, this is all prepared. They even prepared the press release statement. They even prepared what they will do when they fail, because they wanted to target not just this a certain country, but generally the international community to see this tragedy to see this human rights crisis. Okay, this is excerpt from my doctoral dissertation. That only 2000 there are almost 10 attempts storming Spanish embassy, German, U.S., South Korea, Japanese consulate, Albania. What happened in 2002 in China? They wanted to use this opportunity in the hope that Chinese government will do whatever to protect, to their reputation, internationally. So they want to embarrass China. They ignore the human rights basic norms. Okay, and this is underground railroad. If you're from North Korea, first you need to cross over Tuman or Yalu River, mostly Tuman River, and then first you need to arrive in this northeast China. There are lots of villages of ethnic Chinese Korean, Joseonjo. So it's easier to get help from them. You can communicate with them in Korean. So here you need at least one team of assistants. Okay. Sometimes it's called broker, or sometimes activists themselves act as a rescue worker. And then this team hand you over to another team, sometimes here and then here, because Thailand is most hospitable to North Korean refugees, North Korean defectors, and they have a good relations both with North and South Korea. So the goal is to safely arrive here in Thailand. Then you have to cross, Laos or Myanmar. Which is not very welcome North Korean defectors because they are more close to North Korean government. So it's very risky. It's all this route is over 4,000 kilometers. It takes a lot of money, a lot of risk, a lot of very systemic structure. Okay, this is called underground railroad. It was never naturally, or activists developed this route, and they gathered fund and personnel from South Korea, US, and Europe, Japan, to help North Korea, to rescue North Korea to Thailand and then South Korea. Okay, and this is also from 2002 to 2004. This is the list of key witnesses, and most of them are North Korean defectors who have experience in the political prison camps in North Korea. And they testify at these congressional hearings. And then what happened in 2004? Yes, the North Korean Human Rights Act was passed at the US Congress and Senate. Of course, this 탈북자, this defector, played a very crucial role passing the act. Okay, I should emphasize some North Korean defectors. Not all North Korean defectors, because we have now in South Korea over 30,000 북한 이탈 주민, 30,000 residents from the north. But most of them, I think over 90%, are very, very busy with meeting their ends meet, getting their ends meet. Because this is their new place. If you're young, you need to study English. There's no 학원, 영어 학원, like English institute, private institute back in North Korea. They have to study hard. Everything is so new. Yeah. Out of 30,000 North Korean residents from the north, most of them, I think, they cannot afford having these activities. But some North Korean defectors very actively engaged in these activities and became legitimate representatives of their oppressed compatriots. This is the construction of North Korean defectors in a very certain way. Also, I said earlier that 탈북자 actually does not sound like fiction, not 100% to South Korean, at least for me. So, for example, like this, there are many accidental defectors, some people left the north without imagining they would end up becoming South Korean national, and they have no idea that South Korean law does not allow them to freely travel to North Korea. But somehow they left the North, and then they accidentally traveled through these mainland China and then to Southeast Asia, and then arrived in South Korea. Most of them, they satisfied with this freer and wealthier environment, but some few they don't think that way. So 탈북 is actually a much broader concept than defection. Anyway, during the course of this single event, now defection became a proof of regime's weakness or even collapse. Okay, it was recognized if defection increase, the regime will be collapsed. There may be problems. Interpreted as such. Please don't get me wrong. I respect these North Korean defectors act, especially their efforts contributed to the raising awareness of North Korean human rights situation internationally, which ends up establishing the Commission of Inquiry, the UN Commission of Inquiry, which find out that the crimes against humanity had occurred and still occurring in North Korea. And then in 2014, the final report of the COI confirmed that. And then later in 2016, influenced the South Korean society, South Korean politics, and the law passed the North Korean human rights law. It imposed the obligation to South Korean government to have to monitor the situation in North Korea and to provide for resources to the North Korean human rights organizations. So these changes, I think generally I see it as a positive, but there are dark sides, I'm academics, and I think that these dark sides should be also mentioned and emphasized. First one is during the course of North Korean defectors in a very certain way, the hostile policy, military policy, security policy toward North Korea is supported. On the other hand, the humanitarian approach, peaceful approach, other alternative approach made impossible. Okay, so one of my friend, confessed me, told me very helplessly that he is working. I don't know. He's still working at the humanitarian aid organization, but he said it's impossible. It's almost impossible for having campaigning for North Korean people. It's impossible. So that's one problem. And another thing is naturalizing. It's a more deeper level. So in that way, North Korea is naturalized as impossible state. This is the title of the book written by Victor Cha, George Washington University. I'm not sure, but it's impossible. It's irredeemable. Like Hazel Smith once called, North Korea is recognized as irredeemable. It's a waste of time. You're trying to persuade, you're trying to communicate with North Korea. It's a waste of time. It's the way it is. So nothing is possible. What I argue in my dissertation is this made a very significant discursive shift. As I explained earlier, there was a humanitarian sentiment, and they made a unconditional aid for peaceful Korean Peninsula. But then it's moved towards human rights focus. Human rights focus in itself it's actually universal value. However, when you only focus on the individual rights, then it's North Korea can only regard it as non-violating country. There's no way that North Korean we can maybe negotiate. We can have some recommendation. We can make some positive relations. Cannot be built. I should wrap up my presentation. I will quote some of the article. It's very well sums up the problem of North Korean defectors data. was also written by Professor Song, but relying entirely on interviews with biased sampling of North Korea defectors and unverifiable information without critical thinking can result in misrepresentation of the country and its people. Analysis based on interviews therefore require data transparency, triangulation of multi-site sources, rigorous peer review, and validation. So my references are here. Thank you.